And we're back with Riders of the Dawn. This is Stu.
This is Jay.
We're going to talk about vision today, which is your vision, how your vision affects storytelling, whether you're writing a story, whether you're observing a story. And what I mean by vision is your vision of humanity.
And we talked about this in the podcast version quite a bit with like Tolkien's idea of reality, and basically Tolkien was an anarcho-capitalist, and so the Shire was this idealized version of
it was an
anarchist paradise.
Yeah, it was an anarchic paradise. There's no rulers really. There's like community leaders, but they have no specific authority. There's no like book of law. Everything, all the relationships are sort of managed socially and via sort of a Confucian level of cultural doctrine, like sort of this is the way that things are done. Family relationships matter. That's why hobbits care so much about their relationships, is because they want to know how closely or distantly related they are to someone, because that affects their relative and how they deal with
how they
person.
treat them, and the level of care that they give to that person. Which it's like in society now, we're demanded to. You have to care about everyone equally, which is kind of psychopathic in my view.
Yeah. I think that's like not just anti-rational. I think that's actually a little bit misanthropic to say you should care about everyone equally, because some people you should definitely care about less than others. And sometimes there's like this humanist perspective where it's like, Charles Manson's still a human, so he still deserves to have medical treatment. It's like, yeah, but if you get down to it, does anyone really want him to have medical treatment? Does anybody value his existence? Right? Those who have the most important existence to you, they're the people that you actually end up spending your resources carrying on day-to-day activities. So, that's kind of part of my vision of humanity, at least.
So, I mean, we could talk about, like we mentioned Tolkien. I know, especially reading the more modern, or the second trilogy of the Mistborn saga by Brandon Sanderson, you have kind of the same deal, because the main character is a sheriff. He's a lawman. So you see the lawman's perspective of his role in society, and that makes a lot of that really informs the story. And not only does it inform the story, but it in some cases informs Sanderson's view on the world. And my take on Sanderson is he's got a lot of libertarian views, just based on how his lawman interacts with the world.
Yeah, I think actually fantasy literature is populated with a huge number of anarchists and libertarians, far more than sort of the recent additions to the genre would like to admit. Like, say, who am I thinking of? Patrick Rothfuss. Patrick Rothfuss is like a total SJW, but if you look at Michael Moorcock's a libertarian, arguing with Robert Heinlein about whose libertarianism was the best, because they're both libertarians. Yeah. Tolkien, as we mentioned, was an anarchist. I think,
and not this Antifa anarchist.
No, like a real anarchist. Like, and he said multiple times, like, one man should not be made to rule over another. That's like a, and he was very religious. So for him, that's an inversion of a relationship because men are supposed to relate to each other like this and relate to God like this. That there's not supposed to be a man standing above you, because that's not what God intended. And you can even, and not to get too deep into the Bible, but you can even look at the book of Judges going into the book of Samuel in the Old Testament, and the Israelites had constructed, had a tribal relationship, a tribal structure to their society that had judges who were military leaders when they were needed, and they didn't have kings, and they demanded a king like these other countries. And that's when the decline of the system began, is that as soon as you uplifted a king, the king leaves the kingdom to his sons, who are not the same man as the one who had the power. So yes, David might have been a great king, Solomon might have been a great king, but from there the decline begins to happen until it's conquered from without. And I think that's an important theme. Yeah. But yeah, also Terry Goodkind,
very clearly libertarian.
Yeah. So I mean, and you can see this in the work that's there. And I would say, like, if you've ever read A Conflict of Visions by Thomas Sowell,
yeah.
he's a social theorist and an economist who actually got his doctorate under Milton Friedman, said he was a socialist. He's like, I studied with Milton Friedman and I was a socialist. He's like, what made you stop being a socialist? He goes, I went and I worked for the government. I went and worked for the Department of Labor, and within 2 years I stopped being a socialist. You know, like the harsh reality kind of like conflicted with his idyllic view. And he has two visions. One's called the constrained vision. The other's the unconstrained.
Yeah. So it's like the constrained version is basically you can't be perfect. You are not perfectible. You can work really hard, but there's always this limit to yourself, which things like capitalism really speak a lot to, because you have to work together because there's no way that you could possibly be great at everything. Whereas you have the unconstrained vision, which is
mankind is perfectible, but I think the means there is what's being talked about important, because if a mankind's perfectible, that means he can be altered in a significant way.
Right.
So the unconstrained vision views man's nature as malleable.
It's like water; you can just pour it into a vessel and it'll take whatever shape
the
vessel
whatever shape is there.
Whereas the constrained vision is more like, your genetics, your nature is fixed,
and you're flawed, right? Like nobody is good at everything, and even the people that we think of as being like ultra intelligent, like Stephen Hawking. Stephen Hawking can know a lot about physics, and then you hear him talk about philosophy or politics or humanity or some of these things, and you realize he doesn't know that much, and he says a lot of things that. Just if he knew everything, he wouldn't say those things.
Yeah.
But that's not his expertise. And I think there's a flaw. A big human flaw is the arrogance to believe that you can step outside of your limitations and be an expert and dictate what other people ought to do and ought to say. I think that's a big limitation or a big temptation. And so those are themes that I think can be explored in literature and have been explored in literature.
So I'm rereading Joe Abercrombie's First Law series, which is I would say it's one of my favorite book series, especially by a modern author. It's definitely my favorite modern authors series, and he explores a lot of I don't even know if he does it consciously, but he explores a lot of classically liberal themes. Like self-ownership, because he has basically three governments, three regions of governance that all govern themselves in different ways, and the ones with kings often are they're the least, the humans as you would think of them. Well, they're all humans, but the European style man is led by a king who the kingship was passed down to him by his father, and so on and so forth. And it's gotten more and more corrupt as time goes on. You're born into your place in society. You can't move outside of that caste. And that's at least very un-American. The whole point of America was that you might be born into a certain place, but you can move up or down in the caste system based on lots of things. But what you see exploring this book is how people are free in these other areas, and one character specifically, Gyllenhaal. No, not Gyllenhaal. What's his name? Captain Luthor.
Like,
Captain Luthor. Captain Luthor.
Michael.
He travels with Baez, the first of the Magi, to the farthest edge of the world, and learns he's a noble, and he learns like how worthless he is in comparison to these people who he thought were primitives. And he comes back, and I'm not going to spoil any more of the story, but
here we go.
It's a great story. But what he really explores is like this caste system and how flawed it is. And I think especially in America and in the West specifically, you can see the idea of a set caste is very anti-liberal. So this is explored a lot in literature, especially in fantasy these days, because it's so easy. It's really easy to do. You can set up a fantasy world.
Well, I mean, it was explored as far back. I mean, it was definitely explored as far back as like Ivanhoe, Sir Walter Scott. I mean, he begins the book with a description of thrall, which are slaves, right, of some serfs, basically deceiving a crusader and his entourage as to where they're supposed to go to meet this guy, and having a good laugh about it. Even though they're not free, they sort of get one up on the upper class, and that friction between the peasantry and like a repressive government is a theme in Ivanhoe. In fact, most modern renditions of Robin Hood are based on Ivanhoe by Sir Walter Scott, in case you didn't know. And if you haven't read it, the language it's early 19th century romantic literature, so the language may not be up your alley, but I think there's a great story there, even if it's a bit long. And his version of humanity was like the peasantry were still very human. It was a very kind of liberal view, and a romantic view too. And that was something that you had two visions in the Romantic period. And in fact, Thomas Sowell talks about this going all the way back to the 19th century. You have a vision of humanity where humanity is very malleable and changeable, and then a vision of humanity where essentially we have really, really hard limits. And even back in the 19th century, there's a competition between those in the Romantic ideal. Is a man able to be made into something more than he is, or will his sinful nature always prevent him from becoming great and perfect, that there are no great men? A really popular thing I think in modern fantasy literature is the unheroic vision. I'm just going to call it an unheroic vision.
Yeah,
so if you look at something like George R.R. Martin, but of course you can look even further back. You can look at Robert Jordan has an unheroic vision of mankind, and if you've ever
not all of man, but
yeah, but
in general,
yeah,
I would say,
yeah. So it's really Robert Jordan's vision of it is that the world is full. The heroes in Wheel of Time are not perfect people. They make mistakes all the time. They have flaws in judgment. They have character flaws that they have to overcome. And they're dealing with other people that are selfish and petty and betray them and do these sorts of things. And so it's an unheroic vision of who people are, which contrasts with like Tolkien, where you have real heroic, virtuous characters like Aragorn and Frodo. Like Frodo's grappling with the temptation that he finally fails at was part of Tolkien's vision of humanity as being highly limited and an expression of his religious belief. But Frodo himself is a noble character. He's a character who is exceptionally selfless and wanting to and caring about other people and caring about what's right. Samwise, likewise, even though he has a different personality, is a very noble character. Yeah. So Lord of the Rings is full of very noble characters, and then you have a big tragic character like Boromir, and you have also Gollum, who's a tragic character after the tragedy, right? And so those tend to play off these like very classic visions of humanity, even going back to like Milton. I think.
Well, and I keep thinking I'm coming around to, not only is there like this anti-heroic sentiment in literature, but there's also I would call a personal anti-heroism happening in Hollywood, where we're really seeing characters end up mistakenly being heroic, and they're really just kind of pieces of shit most of the time. Like you have a character, it's like, why do we have to have this character save the cat? Well, it's because he's not heroic. He's a piece of shit, and I need you to like him. And eventually, you'll see him grow, but he's still kind of a piece of shit at the end.
Yeah, so you like a really flawed character at the beginning, then it's all kind of a little.
It's fine, but there's no heroism. It's like art is supposed to lift you up, not. And I understand like the sentiment of the artist being that you want to have a character who's very relatable, but if every character is an everyman, like who do you have to emulate? Yeah. That's a theme in art that I think we've lost, and a lot of people are trying to come back to like heroism.
Yeah, speaking of everyman characters, think of Harry Potter, right? Because everyone's seen the Harry Potter movies or read the books pretty much, but Harry Potter is an everyman in the sense that he's he's not especially virtuous. He's not especially skilled. Like, he's good at playing Quidditch, and that's about it. And doing one thing in Quidditch, actually. But he's, he doesn't excel academically. He's really a very plain character, and his personality traits are not super well defined. It's not like he gets angry whenever somebody uses a straw or something. Like, he doesn't have anything that sets him off necessarily. Yeah. Like, he has this past with his parents, and you can see that makes him angry, and that's I guess a part of his characterization. But he's easily relatable. But at the same time, Harry Potter's inner self is something that's virtuous. He steps outside the rules constantly for reasons that he feels are more important than the rules, that go above the rules. Yeah. He's always trying to accomplish something noble, so he has a very noble intent. And that sometimes is lacking. Now, I don't know if you've ever read any of these books. You guys might have. Chronicles of Thomas Covenant.
Oh man, see, I haven't read them, but this is one of those book series that I'm constantly being recommended.
It's okay. So here's what I'm going to say about it. And for some reason, the author's name is just, I could probably Google it real quick.
Well, Ramsey always tells me I got to read the Chronicles of Thomas.
I mean, it's you have to at least try the first book
because he is like the ultimate anti-hero.
Yeah, he's one of the first anti-heroes in Stephen R. Donaldson. That's right. I knew it was one of those sons. So here's the thing about Chronicles of Thomas Covenant is it's almost a running joke how unlikable Thomas Covenant is. He's like a leper. He's not virtuous. He's vicious. Like in the first book,
he's like, I think the first scene he's like raping somebody.
I don't think it's the first scene. He rapes somebody.
Yeah,
right, because he thinks he's dreaming. So,
in a dream, it's okay, right?
Well, it's just like, no, that reveals, but the whole point Donaldson was trying to say there is that it's like, to him, that's an excuse, but to everybody else, it's like, well, your inner self is shining through. That you're like, this is a dream. I'm going to rape. It's like, yeah, okay. Right? So that was the thing, is to show like a really deep viciousness to the character, and he sort of ends up having to go on the quest. And I think there's actually 3 trilogies. There's there's actually 3 trilogies.
So there's 10 books.
There's 10 books.
10 books.
I thought there were 3 trilogies. Lord Fowl's Bane is the first one. And now here's the thing about this one too. I don't think I can recommend it. And maybe we can do another video. Maybe we'll like go read it.
Yeah, let's go read it.
It's been a long time, but if we read it and then we can like talk a little bit about it. The language use in it, he uses a lot of words. Now, you're like, what do you mean a lot of words?
It's like Stephen King, but bad.
No, no, I mean, it's not that. It's that you're coming around, you're like, what does that mean? And you have to go get your thesaurus. And this is something that Elmore Leonard said years ago. About if you make your reader pick up the thesaurus, you've taken a wrong turn.
Yeah.
He's like, you don't want to use you want to use language that's accurate, but if you want to use language that's so accurate that you have to use a thesaurus, you have to get out like a dictionary to figure out what the word means, then you need to rethink what you're doing. You want to. The whole point is to communicate a story. So the thing about Donaldson is he uses a lot of cool words. And if you like seeing a cool word every now and then, it's good.
You might like it.
Yeah. However, there's other authors that I think use lots of cool words better than him. And if you want to look in the fantasy genre, I'd say, Malazan Book of the Fallen has a lot of great wordiness and great prose without you having to go like, what does that word mean?
Yeah.
And I actually have
to get the context.
Yeah, I mean, I probably learned a lot of words from it, but it's one of those things where it's like I had to go. This is way before the internet age, like to go get a dictionary. Like, what does that mean, right? Like, and it's used in a way that I can't figure out its meaning from the context. Yeah. It's like, it's like supercilious. You're like, wait, what is that?
I gotta check that out.
I gotta go look at. Supercilious. Is he super silly, or
is he super serious?
Is he super serious? I don't know.
He's
right?
silliest.
So there's that. Like the style of it may stop you from liking it. However, it's it's one of those important books. It's kind of the De Mysteriis Dom Sathanis of literature, of fantasy literature. And if you don't know what that is, that's a Mayhem album from the early 90s that like it was like super influential in black metal, but people listen to it and they're like, I don't get
this is harsh.
What am I listening to?
Yeah.
And it's like everyone's like, yeah, it's really important.
It's really you just don't get it. You're not into the genre. You're not gonna understand.
You know, and I know plenty of guys who love like way harsh black metal stuff, and they hear De Mysteriis Dom Sathanis and like, I understand why it's important. I don't like it.
I am one of those guys. I don't like it, but I get it.
Yeah, I get it. So it's like that. You know, it's a really important book in fantasy literature, but not one. There's of course there's deep fans of everything, but it's not one that most people I think are going to find a strong connection with. It's not poorly written. You know,
what is his view of reality?
Yeah, his view of reality is essentially so he presents a duality to me, and maybe we can go deep. I'll reread it and we can go deeper into this. But the duality is you're presented with this idea that something that a character who's deeply wicked can be redeemable.
Okay,
and then that doesn't happen. So you're like, what is his vision? Well, his vision is one of a humanity.
So it's like Seinfeld.
Yeah, it's like kind of like Seinfeld. Like it's not nihilistic. It's just the expectation that people are good is wrong. That there are bad people, and chances are even bad people doing good things are still bad people in the end. And that's kind of his view of humanity. It's very unheroic, you know, and anti-heroic in a sense. So Thomas Covenant's viewed as like an anti-hero. Yeah. But all the characters are somewhat unheroic. You know, they're not particularly virtuous or strong.
And this is why I think there's been a strong I wouldn't call it a resurgence, but there's been a big growth in readership in things like dark fantasy and grimdark fantasy, because if your setting is brutal and unforgiving and really horrible graphic things happen, you have to have a light. There has to be someone who is heroic within that, too.
Like Puck.
Like, yeah, well, that's not really what I mean, but, like, so Puck is not from Midsummer Night's Dream, but from
Berserk. From
Berserk. So,
I don't have any Berserk sitting around.
Gatsu from Berserk he is a heroic anti-hero. Like, you see him doing really messed up stuff, but it's... You need the comic relief. Really what I mean is not comic relief characters, but just characters that you need, like they're doing something good. Because frankly, at this point in some mainstream literature, I don't see people doing good things. Frankly, yeah. So there's Puck.
Here's Gatsu with his fairy friend Puck.
Yeah.
So this is a manga that it was a pretty influential manga, I would say. Here's Puck drawn a little bit more clearly. He's like, look at my eyes, and here's, I think this is Casca in the background. But it's so dark and so unforgiving and so full of blood and guts and demons that the author put in this weird sidekick, and Guts does not like his sidekick, Puck. He teases Puck and flicks him off his shoulder, but then you know, in the first little mini arc that introduces you to the characters, he oh, look at that. I'm cutting you out of the frame. Good. Get out of here.
No, get me back in. What am I doing?
So yeah, like Puck is saves Gatsu in the first like little mini arc before things really take off.
Well, and you see this in literature all the time. So you see if we talk about the First Law again, Brother Longfoot in the First Law series does the same thing where he just talks a lot, and he talks so much and about nothing that it becomes funny. So does, who's the guy in Malazan? Krupa.
Oh yeah,
Krupa is very wise.
You are lucky to.
He just talks incessantly about nothing, and you're just like, this character can't be for real, and he is.
Yeah,
but you
also learn that he's like
kind of a god, but we don't
he's like
really
the smartest
understand
dude
why.
alive.
Yeah,
and is like secretly.
But really, what I mean is that you
manipulating everyone.
The characters themselves might be tragic, but they're still doing heroic things. Whereas in a lot of Hollywood instances at this point, people aren't doing heroic things. I recently, over on my channel, did a review of Baby Driver. which I thought was great. But even the hero in that movie was not doing anything heroic. He was just kind of a dude trying to get by. And you see this a lot with Hollywood, especially. And then you have the inverse of that, which is the Marvel comic movies, which are just unadulterated nonsense. Like they're over the top heroic, but even those heroes are, in some cases, I'd say overly relatable. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, they're not they're everymen with superpowers, but they also have like super virtue in a lot of cases. Now that I did do a review on this channel on Captain America: Civil War, which I thought was not a very good movie in terms of plot. I mean, it was visually exciting, and that is okay, I guess. But you have sort of some forced flaws put onto the Tony Stark character, onto Iron Man. So that there could be a conflict between him and Captain America. But I never bought the conflict because Tony Stark was always a guy who was super independent, and he's going against his normal things. Yeah. So it was just an inversion of what you'd expect characters to do.
Yeah. So we're looking at Elric right now.
Yeah, so this is Elric. And since we're talking about visions of humanity, I think we mentioned Michael Moorcock was a libertarian.
We talk about him all the time.
So libertarians usually have what's called, if you're going to divide, so there's three big schools of thought with political theory: liberal, realist, and Marxist. And there's others, but those are the three big ones that have dominated politics over the last 100 years. So a liberal essentially believes that in the state of nature, people cooperate with each other and are very okay with each other being free. That would be Tolkien. Yeah. Tolkien has a liberal view of humanity.
And really people do best when they're able to make their own decisions. It's self-governance is a big theme.
Yeah. And then a realist one is essentially, in the state of nature, there's war of all against all. So you have to have systems of control to prevent brutal anarchy from killing everyone.
And I think that's very Machiavellian.
Yeah, it's I don't. Let's talk about Machiavelli.
All right.
On some other
podcast.
Because I would love to talk about The Prince and how important that is, and how I think it's also kind of misunderstood. But it's also, the realist views that power of one man over the other is inevitable, so you might as well systematize it in a way that has the best outcomes. And the Marxist view, of course, is going to be about essentially how one class of people, it's a group focused. So the liberal one is the most individual focused. Realist is focused on individuals and turning them into a group, and then the Marxist is exclusively focused on group dynamics. Yeah. So the oppression of the proletariat by the upper classes, and how the bourgeoisie through capitalism create oppression of the proletariat.
So now, if you have to get out of a thesaurus, those are good words to look up.
The bourgeois, the merchant class, the people who do all of the trading and own all of the businesses, end up oppressing the lower classes. That's the Marxist view, and so that's another way that you can look at this. And when we look at Elric, you see a somewhat of an interesting character, because where Michael Moorcock ended up politically, I think, is different from where he started. Elric, when he started, was an extreme version of an anti-hero in the real sense. It wasn't a villain that you identify with. This is a guy who did things that you didn't agree with, and did things that were unexpected. So in the first stories he wrote, which you could find in The Weird of the White Wolf, which has this book cover right here, Weird of the White Wolf. I believe this is a Michael Whalen cover. It looks pretty good. I like these old Dahl paperback covers. In the first part of that, and spoilers, whatever. The first part of that, if you haven't ever read Elric, you should just read it anyway. He essentially attacks his home city with the sole intent of getting revenge and usurping his cousin, who has his sister, who's Elric's in love with his cousin. Has his sister in prison. He's going to save Cimmeril, his love, and he's going to kill Yirkun, his evil cousin, who he has left on the throne. And he's going to do that by destroying his city, because he thinks that the Melnibonéans are too corrupt, they're too evil, they're too decadent. He's going to destroy them. And so he does so, and he accidentally kills the woman he loves on his soul-stealing blade, Stormbringer. Then he, as they are leaving the sack of the Dreaming City, the destruction of a 10,000-year-old city, which is his homeland and his people, like he destroys his own people, they get attacked by like the military of Melniboné that's like in wait outside of the port, and he uses his magic to try to speed the raiding ships away so that they'll survive. But the Melnibonéan ships are too powerful, and then the dragons come out. They like ride dragons and stuff. So he focuses all his magic on his own ship so he can escape, and leaves everyone else to die. That, to me, is a true action of an anti-hero. It's completely self-focused and self-preserving and anti-heroic. Yeah. It's not like specifically evil, but it's cowardly. It doesn't have any nobility or virtue. And so the Melnibonéans represent Michael Moorcock's view of like a, I don't know what I'd call it necessarily, like a realist society, maybe?
Well, I'm
not sure what I call Melniboné. They're very like, they're aligned with the Lords of Chaos, but they're way into ruling other people. Yeah. And they tend to view other races as inferior to them. And Elric is a liberal. He wants to go out and experience these other cultures, but he ends up just detesting his own culture and wanting to destroy them. And then when he does all these anti-heroic things, then he becomes like a weird, restless loner. Yeah. And he tries to throw away his black blade, and he has like a deficient blood, right? Because he's an albino and stuff. And he needs the sword to kill people, to harvest their souls so that he can continue surviving. Yeah. So he ends up completely united with this sword, addicted to it, unable to get it. He's a highly flawed human being that's incredibly selfish. Yeah. But at the same time, he's also a character that is striving for nobility. Yeah. So it's an interesting overlap of a couple of different themes there. The competition of the realist and the liberal, I think, is really, really, really interesting.
And I think so. That's like a realist and liberal pushover. But there's something that I saw. There's a trend in journalism I started to see in the early 2000s of like detesting the hero because of the people that he leaves behind. And I remember it wasn't this plane crash in the Hudson, but there was some other tragedy where a guy like helped people out of this river up onto a helicopter, and finally like helped the last person up, and then he just died. Like that was all he wanted to do, and he died in this river. And I remember like hit pieces coming out about this guy, and like them interviewing his family like years later, and they were like, hey, it really sucked to grow up without my dad, and he was a hero for you. I hope you're happy. And it's like, we've talked again about narrative within journalism, and this is a very kind of Marxist idea and theme in storytelling, because it's downplaying the heroics of the individual in order to demonize them, to make them lower or at the same level as, quote, the proletariat, so that everyone's exactly the same. No one has done anything or created anything that is worthy of celebration. And if you have, we have to demonize it in such a way that it doesn't make you better than anyone else.
Yeah. Reminds me of actually talking about Star Trek. For a while, it was a Star Trek podcast.
Yeah, it was a Star Trek podcast. Yeah.
So, very famous scene at the end of Star Trek 2. They show a competition between these two themes, where Spock sacrifices himself to save the crew. It says the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, or the one. Mm-hmm. Now, that phrase, people say it every so often, and I'm like, that is actually, I consider that phrase misanthropic. That's from a utilitarianism, essentially, which is that there's some grand calculus that can be made with human lives and human needs. That, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. Therefore, we're just going to take all of your stuff, because you're just a few people that have stuff, and we're going to give it to lots of people and fulfill the needs of lots of people. Mm-hmm. Essentially, that is at the heart of socialism, is we'll take from the few who have much and give to the many who have little. Mm-hmm. The problem with that is that as soon as you do that, you haven't improved the lot of the you haven't improved the lot of the little guy all that much, if at all. I mean, you could look at communist Russia as an example of this, and you've destroyed
communist Venezuela right now.
Yeah, and in the process, you've killed lots of people. Communist Russia, I'm trying to remember how many people Stalin killed.
Killed or let starve, or both.
If we say the ones he killed, it's in the millions. If it's the ones that let starve, it's in the tens of millions.
It's in the tens of millions.
And that doesn't include the soldiers who died in World War II needlessly, because the Soviet Union did not equip them or feed them correctly, or bother to have any kind of strategic consistency. You know, the casualty rate of Russian soldiers was so high in World War II compared to that of the Allies. It's like mind-boggling. You know, and I don't have the stats in front of me, but it was like it was kind of frightening to see how much more likely you were to die as a Russian soldier. And the brunt of like Hitler's attack, the brunt of the violence in the European theater was between Russia or between the USSR and Nazi Germany. And it was incredibly brutal. And so even that, you know, to think that he continued that and continued. In fact, there's a movie that actually shows this. It was called Enemy at the Gates. It had Sam Harris in it, and there's this scene where like they're just unloading soldiers off of a train, and they're like, "You run behind this guy, and when he dies, you pick up his gun and keep shooting." You have two. Yeah. You have 2 magazines of ammunition. It's like,
have fun. Well, and you think about this, if we keep talking about Star Trek, you look at the difference between Gene Roddenberry's idea of Star Trek and Rick Berman's idea of Star Trek, because
Rick Berman's
you look at even through Next Generation, it was really true to Gene Roddenberry. Gene Roddenberry died in the 3rd season of Next Generation.
Yeah, I think he died in the 3rd season.
And then so Rick Berman took over, and God bless Rick Berman. I think what he did with the franchise was fantastic. But then you get to Deep Space Nine.
You're gonna make some enemies saying that.
I like Rick Berman.
Just ask yourself, when was the last time that you thought Star Trek was like really good? And chances are Rick Berman was on the show.
Did it. So as soon as Deep Space Nine came out, we had to deal with the Ferengi. Now the Ferengi are this really kind of comical version of a socialist thinking of capitalism.
Yeah.
But suddenly they realize that an intergalactic system with no currency doesn't make sense.
So they invented latinum.
They invented gold pressed latinum, and that suddenly, like to me at least, the world gained a huge amount of depth just because now we had to think about incentives. What is incentivizing people to do things?
Deep Space Nine. So anyway, let me back up one step because I didn't quite finish the thought. So at the end of Star Trek 2, Spock sacrifices himself. At the end of Star Trek 3, the crew sacrifices itself to save Spock. It sacrifices their career and their, it sacrifices the things that they value in their lives, which is their like commitment to Starfleet. To like, steal the ship, and then save Spock, so that their friend can exist again, because they have an opportunity to have him exist again. So you have, on these 2 movies, you have a mirror image of the view of humanity. In one, you have this view where it's like a Marxist view. Yeah, it's completely sacrifice yourself for the greater good. And then the other half is that no, like, individuals matter, and people can choose to save individuals at great expense to themselves, and large groups can choose to save one individual at the expense of themselves. Absolutely. And it is a worthy cause, because friendship is valuable, and and an individual human life is valuable as well. Of all my friends, he was the most human. Of all the souls I have known, his was the most human. Which is insulting to Spock, but also,
but also endearing to the audience.
But back to these guys, the Ferengi. So the Ferengi I loved because when you first see them, they're comical. They're meant to make fun of, this weird, wacky 20th century capitalism where people trade money for things instead of just doing stuff. Yeah. And then by the time that Rick Berman's really the showrunner and Deep Space Nine comes out, and actually Deep Space Nine I think is my favorite series.
Now the first 2 seasons weren't very good.
Yeah, the first 2 seasons were not that good.
But
once,
oh man,
once you get to that third season, it starts getting good. But you get a humanization of the Ferengi where you acknowledge their weird culture where they like go on pilgrimages to Wall Street. Yeah. To like pay homage to the capitalist gods. They didn't invent warp technology, they bought it. Yeah. All these sorts of things. But at the same time, you get a deep humanity of you get a deep human look at the Ferengi, and you understand like that even the most like wicked businessman has his own problems and his own things that he's thinking about, and isn't particularly evil. Like even Armin Shimmerman's character Quark has these episodes of pure nobility that he hates himself for.
Yeah.
Right? Because
he gets this like crazy self-loathing when he does like something heroic.
Yeah, and they're always quoting like the rules of acquisition. It's like no good deed goes unpunished. It was like
rule acquisition 75. Or 280. Yeah. There's 245 rules of acquisition, and I'm sure you can find
what was it? Treat your employees like your family. Exploit them. So this view of it was really like they encapsulate the greed of humanity. They represent the greed of humanity personified. And what's also interesting about how the show progressed is when Gene Roddenberry was running the show, or when he was more involved
when his vision was running the show,
because it kind of ousted him in like Star Trek 2, and Star Trek 2 was really good. But all the characters, all the characters were really noble, and they were very. They weren't like, they didn't have petty squabbles amongst each other.
They were Paragon-like characters.
They were Paragon characters, yeah. And then once Rick Berman takes it over and you get to Deep Space Nine, you stop having these like extreme Paragon characters, and instead you have very relatable, more human characters. O'Brien and Bashir and what's the
Nerys.
Captain's name?
Cisco.
All of these people have like deep human feelings that they're struggling with issues. And I still think you have the core Star Trek in Deep Space Nine. You have issues that you're talking about. It's about it's allegorical for a lot of social issues. There's that great episode where, and it's speaking about visions of humanity, where you have the ambassador who is injured in the attack by like the secret sect of Starfleet. And they replaced part. I think that's who he's attacked by. And they replaced part of his brain with a cybernetic implant. Under Bashir's pressure to do it, and he wakes up and he doesn't quite feel like himself because he's been altered. He's been altered, and his brain continues to deteriorate. And they continue to ask him to fix him with cybernetics. And at a certain point, Bashir says, "No, I'm drawing the line." If I do any more to this man, he will cease to be a man. He will cease to be human. He'll cease to be who he is and become something other than who he is. Yeah. That he won't have his correct feelings. It's like, yes, maybe his memories are intact, but that's not who he is. You're more than your memories, your feelings, your emotions, your soul is somehow something intangible that's within you that once you've severed the mind, it can't be recovered. And so he looked down that like dark chasm and refused to go down it, which I think was a really, really interesting turn in that story. So I think Star Trek's great because you have each race sort of represents a different side of humanity. You have the Vulcans, who are total stoics. The Romulans, who are the mirror image.
They're all passion and vinegar. Yeah,
and then you have the Klingons, the warriors. Who are some other ones that are interesting?
Well, you've got the Cardassians, and their view is interesting because they're like the primary totalitarian, and then you're juxtaposed with that by the changelings, who are even worse.
Yeah, who view like control as the only. They're realist. Yeah, they view control as the only way to maintain peace and stability.
And then you've got the Bajorans, they're like, I mean, throughout the entire thing, even after they've developed their own race, they're like rebels still, and they're a very spiritual race. And that's actually one thing that I really appreciated about Deep Space Nine was that Star Trek was such an atheist-oriented
show for so long.
IP, for a really long time. Then suddenly the Bajorans come along, and then suddenly a Starfleet officer is their emissary, and part of Benjamin Sisko's arc through that is accepting his role as the emissary, and that speaks a lot to me, especially about a lot of social things that are happening today. Is that suddenly a lot of atheists are saying, what is the point of me hating Christianity? Or what is the point of me hating religion in general? What has it accomplished? Because it certainly hasn't accomplished what I thought it would, which is like the dismemberment of ignorance.
Yeah, what they thought. What people thought is that, and Nietzsche predicted this 150 years ago, or not. I
always forget the name of the book.
Well, there's a couple, Beyond Good and Evil. I say I recommend you read these, but a lot of people won't get through them. Thus Spake Zarathustra are two that I think you should read those. And I'm trying to remember which one he said. He said, God is dead and we've killed him. And he spoke, once you remove this layer of spirituality from people, once you remove the sort of control of the church, what happens to them? And they become nihilistic and they stop valuing anything, is what he feared. Is that once people lost their ongoing connection to like the soul, once they stopped believing in a soul, they would stop believing in good and evil. And
and to interject, like what we see is it's like religious people and non-religious people, as far as I haven't seen any data to correlate that one will murder more than the other. But what's interesting is that the nihilism of one will outshine or not nihilism, the hedonism of atheists will outshine the work ethic, or work ethic isn't really what I mean, but the ability to be focused to a purpose of the religious.
Yeah, I think the calling to a higher purpose, that was a big theme with the Bajorans, like you said. Mm-hmm. And Benjamin Sisko's accepting of a religious role. And also, I really liked that they portrayed people who were religious as not crazy.
Yes. Now, but they did have Vedic Wynn was a fantastic character in even if only because they made her so easy to hate. And she's really a foil for like the 1980s, 1990s religious right. And she did a really great job. But you have all these religious figures who are not that, who are reformists, and that reformists within the religion is such a WINN is such a huge. It's important today. It's really important today, even. So, here's Vedic Wynn.
Yeah, so they really got to explore that, like the darker side of what religion could do. Mm-hmm. It has a chance to uplift and it has a chance to press down. Now I'm going to interject this. Here's the thing: is that once we remove, people thought, once we get rid of this this sort of supplication to a religious tradition, people's minds will be freed. They were not. Mm-hmm. History's proven that that's not the case, and what has replaced God is the state, where the state is the nurturing mother, no longer Mother Nature and God. It's now the state. The state can provide this. The state provides this. I have a right to this. I have a right to have this given to me. It ends up becoming a much more a much darker place. You mentioned hedonism. Mm-hmm. If there's no afterlife, what's wrong with seeking pleasure in the now? And not all atheists think that way, obviously. Yeah. But there are some who do. It's like people who say, I believe that there is no... So, just as example, I believe that there is no objective morality. People will say that. But I don't believe that there's any real morality. Well, by saying that, you're kind of saying that you have a preference for people not to lie because you're trying to tell the truth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which means that you have a preferable behavior. And actually, Stefan Molyneux, I think, has done a really good job of logically mapping out...
Yeah, I think he used that exact argument pretty recently, too.
Logically mapping out morality. And it's easy to logically... I think if you look at what he's done, it makes a lot of sense how he's described universally preferable behavior.
Yeah.
And
I talked about it on my channel. I said, I had a whole video on paradoxes because I'm interested in them. And one of them is that there's no absolute truth. That's a statement that literally cannot be true.
Yeah, because if there's no absolute truth, then that itself is an absolute truth, thereby
negating the entire thing. It's a it's a paradox. It literally cannot be true. Mm-hmm. So anyway, yeah, he has a thing called universally preferable behavior. You can think of that as the next step from, say, Immanuel Kant.
But what's interesting is even Stefan says that, like, the world needs religion.
Yeah,
which is interesting. Being a confessed atheist, he's like, I'm an atheist, and I will not be an atheist. But I think the world needs religion. And you see a lot of these guys in the skeptic community coming out and saying, like, my whole channel revolved around atheism and being an atheist, and we need to all be atheists. And now I don't think that anymore.
Yeah. And that's, I think, to me, that's a representation of a bit of the truth of the realist vision, as much as a liberal that I am. Once you remove a system of a code of behavior from people, the way that they choose to organize their lives becomes profoundly different when they don't have a purpose and they don't have, like, something that's really binding them to, like, a particular path. People that are not religious are less likely to have children, which is interesting, because that indicates to me, like, no sense that the next generation is important, or that you have to continue who you are, that, like, who you are needs to go into the next generation, or that go forth and multiply doesn't matter. There's so many burden, like, children are just now a burden.
They're seen as a burden, and, like, and not only that, but, like, why would I want to bring a child into this world in this state that the world is in?
You mean this world where we're talking to all kinds of people through magical boxes?
Yeah.
That world? Or the world where, like, they can...
Where I have all the information available to man in my pocket.
Or the world where, like, we could encode a virus with... to inject a piece of DNA that's broken in a human being to cure a genetic illness. That's happening right now with factor IX hemophilia in Europe and in the Netherlands. They created a hepatitis virus, put the kids on immunosuppressant drugs, put it in them, it infected their liver, and replaced their deficient DNA with DNA that was capable. Wow. And once the virus went away, the DNA was in the cells, and when the cells replicate, that DNA replicates.
Wow. And
all it is it's just a protein sequence, and it just started making their clotting factor so that they weren't hemophiliacs anymore. You cured a genetic disease using a programmed virus.
Wow.
That's the kind of world. It's like, I wouldn't want to bring my kids into this world. It's like the world where we're curing things that wiped off the planet entire royal families hundreds of years ago. We're curing that using a thing that used to also kill. It's just killed hundreds of millions, billions of people over the years, which is virus. Like, that's amazing to me. Like, what do you mean you don't want to bring your kid into the most amazing time in the recorded the history of the universe?
I feel like we should plan to do live streams.
Because
it'd be really nice to have some, like...
I could have live streamed this.
It'd be really nice to have some comments. So maybe leave some comments, tell us if you want to.
Yeah, leave some comments. Last contrast of humanity, I think we went over it. Hedonism versus elevated virtuous motivation, right? Mm-hmm. So hedonism, and this is biblical. You have this in biblical. You have Sodom and Gomorrah, which are hedonistic, right? And Sodom and Gomorrah,
which was named after a
completely different move, an even crazier move. So Sodom and Gomorrah represents in the biblical all that is hedonistic, and in it you have one virtuous man who gets essentially freed from the oppression of the hedonists, and as soon as the angels come in, the people of Sodom want to. It depends on your interpretation. They want to have sex with the angels. So, like, that's in that story, the hedonism is repressive. It's oppressive. Sorry. It's a thing that is hurting you because it limits your ability, because people want you. They want to do something with you. They want to take from you in a sense. And you contrast that with a noble vision of like, hard work, chastity, saving for the future. Those are the virtues that are forward thinking. And so the contrast is what's good in the now and what's great in the fourth dimension.
Yeah. Well, and you see this now with people saying like, you got money, you might as well spend it. You can't take it with you, like as though there isn't any other option, like leaving
it to your family to help provide for your genes. Yeah. It's like, why do people leave property once they die? What's that about? They can't take it with them, and it's like, that's why we have children. Yeah, well, let's just think about it from a biological perspective. You want your genes want to replicate. Mm-hmm. That's why you have a sex drive. And so because your genes want to replicate, you want to care for your offspring, and
you want your offspring to be able to care for their offspring.
Yeah, you want your lineage to continue forever. That's biological. I think it's also a spiritual thing. And so why shouldn't you leave your belongings for whomever you choose? Yeah. If they're yours, can't you leave them for whomever you want to? Yeah. Rather than enjoying it in the now. Of course, we could talk about inflation. This is now getting very political, but inflation emphasizes hedonism. Yeah. Because if you have $1, it's going to be worth less tomorrow than it is today. You might as well spend it. Mm-hmm. And Milton Friedman said this. He goes, the biggest way you can protect yourself from inflation is to spend your money right now while it still has its value, because it won't have its value tomorrow. If you put it in a bank account, the interest won't even pay for the inflation anymore. Yeah. So you got to lock your money up in something else, or it's not going to be worth what it is. You got to lock it up in stuff. So,
and this is, I'm going to tag on to that, is...
You got to lock it up in stuff. Look at all my guitars!
Yeah. So all of the... there's a reason that we study generational poverty, and it's because families who are in poverty through multiple generations are there through common occurrences. Like there's common behaviors that we see through all of this that are measurable, and a lot of people really don't like talking about it. So especially the Ruby Payne wrote a book that is famously disliked among academic circles because it talks about behaviors that make people continue on in generational poverty. So this idea that spend your money now because you can't take it with you is also telling people in generational poverty that spend your money now, you can't take it with you, and don't look to the future and don't save your money because you need to spend your money. Don't let your kids spend your money. That's selfish of your children. And this is why I think actually talking about the idea of privilege in a political sphere is very counterproductive to the desired outcome. The desired outcome is for people to be successful. But when we talk about privilege and we talk about poverty specifically, I can say that I am privileged in that my family saved a lot of money for me, and they invested in my education, and they did a lot of things that invested in me. Now I can pass that along to my son. Now a family who wasn't able to invest in their offspring, they're not going to be able to do the things that I am able to do.
Careful for your language use. I'm gonna correct your language use here. You guys watch this channel, you know that.
Okay.
I'm always wasn't able to. Now let's just talk about what is rather than the intent.
Well, but let me finish the argument, because I'm with you, right? Because wasn't able to is
they wanted to,
but let's consider I need to not think about myself, but need to think about getting my family out of poverty, right? So it changes your actions in the present when you're thinking about the future. But if your thought of the future is I need to spend my money now because I can't take it with me, you're never going to better your family. So because you're in poverty doesn't mean that your offspring have to be in poverty. Because you're in poverty and your offspring are in poverty doesn't mean that they're not better off than you were. Mm-hmm. Until 2 generations down, and suddenly your family's no longer in poverty. But if all we do is talk about this idea of privilege,
you're focusing on the people who. It's like what you ought to do with privilege is like, well, what did they do to get to be privileged?
Yeah.
Why don't we do that for other people?
Exactly. And let's talk about behavior, because we don't want to talk about behavior.
And that's the other thing about use of language. What is capitalism? Capitalism is that system where people serve the needs of others. That's capitalism. Mm-hmm. Now, most people are like, wait, capitalism is where you have greedy people doing this or that. It's like, no. Because the only way that you make money in a free market is by giving somebody something they want in exchange for the money. So you're serving other people's needs and wants. That's capitalism. Yeah. Right? That's trade.
I feel like we should just do it a separate. Let's talk about capitalism.
And we'll do another one on capitalism.
Because I want to talk about value, and especially about value in the arts.
Yeah, we'll do another one, value in the arts. Let's finish up with talking about the vision of humanity in literature. Okay. Get back to literature.
Where did we go, man?
Yeah, okay. I'm going to give one more example, which is Roald Dahl. Roald Dahl always has the same setup in every book, where you have a kid who is desperately poor. It's the myth of noble poverty. Mm-hmm. He's always desperately poor for reasons outside of his control. Obviously, no child is poor for reasons inside their control. Let me correct that. So he's desperately poor. His family's trying really hard, or his parents got killed, or this or that happens, like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
James and the Giant Peach.
James and the Giant Peach, his parents die. He has to live with terrible aunts. Mm-hmm. They're really bad to him, and then the peach grows huge because of a magic wizard that came by and crushes his evil ants.
And then he lives with happy-go-lucky spiders.
Then he lives with insects in Central Park in a giant peach pit. Roald Dahl, we'll do another one just on Roald Dahl. But he has a really Marxist view. His view is like, we want to create and really he is the originator to me of Save the Cat and Kick the Dog. Okay. He really does it. He really hammers it home. His vision of humanity is one where basically some people are really, really bad, and a lot of people have really, really bad situations beyond their control, and he wants to show how they can be improved, and
through community.
Yeah, through community, and so it's kind of it's an interesting view of humanity as well,
and one I think that isn't by itself wrong, because even in a very liberal society, you want community is hugely important, but it has to be voluntary.
No one chooses the community they're born into, but you definitely choose the community you stay in, at least in the West. Yeah. And I'd say if you're not in the West, you don't choose what community you're born into, but you have an effect over how that community operates because absolutely. You're a member of it, and so you have power as a contributor to that community. I'm a very pro community person or pro tribal person, I suppose.
And it's why you do such a good job in this community that you built.
Yeah. So I anyway, that's probably we need to wrap it up there. We talked for a long ass time. Yeah. And I'm sorry.
I hope you liked it, right? I enjoyed talking.
Yeah, let's plug stuff before we go.
Yes.
Yeah, if you found it, please leave comments down below. As you know, I'm always happy to see those, and I always want to read them, and we always both want to interact.
And I try to troll the comments, even though I don't really see the notifications, but I try and look around too.
Yeah.
Let's plug. So my book, Immortal Fear. Check this out. Okay, I'm super happy. This is my first full-length book that came out. It's on Amazon. This is an urban fantasy. Main character is Silas Bishop. He's a Navy SEAL and he's a badass. So
Former Navy SEAL.
Former Navy SEAL. Excuse me. Yes.
He was kicked out of the Navy SEALs because he beat up Chuck Norris that one time.
Mm-hmm. Really excited about this. Check this out on Amazon. You can check the link below. You can also find me at MatthewJWellman.com.
And I'm going to plug a bunch of books.
Here we go.
So here's the new one. You guys probably have seen me talk about this one a lot. This is Water of Awakening. This is my fantasy novel. My vision of humanity a little bit in this. You want to talk? What's the vision of your vision of humanity in your book?
This is not really my vision of humanity. This is really chaotic. This is about. It's very liberal in that people are acting on their own free will. It's highly influenced by Norse mythology, which is the left-hand path. We want to see people acting on their own free will, which is not always good.
Yeah, it's acting towards your own ends.
Yes. So Silas is a bit of an anti-hero, and you get to see his reasonings and why he does things, and he has a really good journey. Yeah. So I'm really excited about this. I hope you guys like it. Check it out, 99 cents, or you can get the paperback just like this.
Now let me transition with this one, Prophet of the Godseed. This is my hard sci-fi novel. Now, you can get this on Amazon.com right now. I just redesigned the cover so it'll look a little bit different when you look at it on Amazon.com. It's free for a while right now, so you can grab it. Now, we actually created the IP of Deep Time
together.
We created together originally as like
it was our capitalist utopia Star Trek of the future.
Yeah, it was our we wanted something to be Star Trek but not crappy.
Yeah.
So we created Deep Time. It has a couple of things that bind it was relativity and singularity, meaning once people become too united with their technology, they become collectivized, and once you have total collectivization, you have a loss of humanity.
Yeah, there's no going back. You're Borg at that
your
point.
Humanity ends up gone.
And if you check this out, I have a short story at the end.
Yeah, there's a short story by Matt at the end called
Burdens of the Patriarch.
Burdens of the Patriarch. There it is right there.
Yeah.
We can't really, it's too high the exposure, but that's that one, Prophet of the God Seed. That one's a cool one. It's not, as you can see, it's not as thick as my other books, which may be a good thing if you hate my writing. Here's the new one, Water of Awakening. My view of humanity in this one, there's not just humanity, there's also elves. You could think of it as like a medieval or Norse type world, kind of influenced by Tolkien. It's full of people that have their own particular ends in mind, and some people are motivated by extremely selfish things like wanting to live forever. And then you have this whole idea of this race called the Watchers, which is people that are inhuman and do not understand human motivations, the human desire to thrive, the human desire to acquire greatness and nobility and to strive for perfection. They don't understand this, but they want to be human because they see humans doing great things. And they themselves are completely amoral. So there's a contrast here between the moral humans, the humans which are bound by morality, and those who are not bound by morality, and how those things express themselves, and how if you try to how the inhuman beings attempt to be human, and how the ways in which they try to emulate humans are odd. So I tried to create an external force that wouldn't be moral, and but would envy humans, and that's a big theme in this, and it will be a theme in the sequel, and when the sequel comes out. And then of course you could buy my fairy tale Yaramish and the Farmer. This little booklet's $3, but it is free right now on Amazon if you want to get the ebook. So
yep,
that's that.
Cool, guys. We'll check you later.
All right, thanks for watching.